anytime a preacher shows up and he's got 3 of his big Preacher Boy Bibles, then you know that you are probably going to miss a meal or two. Hey guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of Good Word Wednesday, and today we are going to look at Psalm 139, and I know it's kind of late for me to get this out. In fact, this may be a Good Word Thursday by the time you see this, but this morning I was taking Emery to school, and with the time change and everything, we get to the top of the mountain. Really, it's during golden hour. So we get to the top of the mountain really at the best time of the day to look out over God's creation. And this morning, we get to the top of the mountain and we'll look out into Batesville. And sometimes you forget just how beautiful the area that we live in is. Look off the top of the mountain, and there's kind of our side of the mountain, and it's beautiful trees kind of filling in, and then you get down into the field and it's kind of browns and greens and all that kind of stuff. But then there's the river, and on the other side of the river there's other kind of hillside with still some trees that they're holding on to their color, and it's just really beautiful. But the river is just like smoking. It looks like the river's on fire. There's so much fog or steam or whatever coming off of the river, and it's just billowing up, and it's like a wall of steam, a wall of smoke coming off the water there on the river, all the way cutting Batesville in half. And it's just really and truly, it looks like a postcard. It looks like something you would see in a magazine or some beginning of a movie. It's just really breathtakingly beautiful. And I told Emma, hey, look out at that. And she was just taken away by it. And as I thought about it, we're up here on top of the mountain. We get down into the valley. We're going across the bridge. And this beautiful scene that I'm thinking about in my head from the top of the mountain, like, wow, that was just gorgeous, is now this chaotic, dense fog. And you really can't even see off the edge of the bridge. The fog is so thick. You just can't see it. It reminded me one time when I was in high school, we're about to go across the road from what we called Wildside then, but it's the road coming up behind what is Colton's now, and then going across to the Riverside Park Road. And I couldn't see across the road. 2-lane road, couldn't see across it. I looked at my sister. I said, you pray and I'm going to hammer it. And so we did. She prayed. I hammered it. We made it across. No one hit us, but I had no idea if there was a car coming or not because the fog was so thick. And that's how thick the fog was this morning. It was beautiful on top of the mountain. It was chaotic in the valley. And it just started to make me think about how a lot of times that's how life is for us. It's when we're on a mountaintop, we have a mountaintop experience, we can look back and we can look forward and we can see the beauty of what God has planned for us. But there are days when life is just a fog and we're in the midst of chaos and we can't see what's coming and we don't know what's happening and we can't put rhyme or reason to it, and we're just hoping to not have a wreck and to not die. And this morning, kind of seeing both of those, boom, boom, back to back, made me think about Psalm 139. And Psalm 139 is this interesting psalm where David is basically saying, hey, look, God, you know me. There's nowhere I can get away from you. He begins in verse 1. He says, oh, Lord, you have searched me and known me. And I just would say this that God knows you inside and out. And that's what he's going to get to. And he kind of goes through different things. And he says, even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You know what I'm going to say before I even think to say it. He says, you have hemmed me in behind and before. So you've got me from the back and from the front. He says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. You lay your hand on me. That's just too awesome for me. He says, where should I go from your spirit? And he says, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me. Your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. And I just think that's a beautiful verse. In the middle of the darkest day of your life, even the darkness is not dark to God. The darkness to us is scary because we don't know what's there. When I was a little kid, we had that big, wide, kind of a double door opening to our kitchen and dining area. And on the other side of the dining room, there was a one of those sliding glass doors that look good but don't open well. And so it scared me to death because there was just darkness and you had no idea what was looking at you from those glass doors. And so I would sneak up to it and then run across it and then walk back down the hallway. And it scared me to kind of go in there and go by that door as a little kid because the darkness, we don't know what's there. And so it's scary to us. God knows what's there. The darkness is not dark to him. And then he says this. It says, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. And what I want to do is kind of compare a few different versions today. A few different translations. In the King James, it says, for thou hast possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. It's a very interesting way of saying it. And the King James has some really weird words in it sometimes, but sometimes those weird words are just because we're not used to saying them. And sometimes those weird words are put in there on purpose so that we can stop and think about what it says. And I have a tendency to, when I read something and I understand everything around it, but I don't understand that word, to kind of jump and skip forward. But that's not what we need to do. When we're reading Scripture and we're studying Scripture, we get to a word, it kind of stands out as not making sense there. It's usually used by translators there for a purpose, and that purpose is to stop us and to slow us down so that we can think about what that says. So the King James says, for thou hast possessed my reins. The ESV says, for you formed my inward parts. The New American Standard says, for thou didst form my inward parts. And so this forming my inward parts, we can think about that. Okay, so you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. And you can begin to think, okay, well, he's saying, you know me, you've searched me, you know me, you put me together from the inside out. But that's not what he's saying there. This inward parts, this possessed my reins. If you go back and you look up those words in the Strong's Concordance, you'll find out that possessed word there means, that formed word could mean create. It also could mean to own. It could also be translated in a way that means to purchase or to sell. And what we need to think about here is that this possessed, this formed, it is this idea that God looked at you as he was creating you. And this reins and this inward parts, you could think that means my intestines, my heart, all this kind of stuff. But the reins there is a unique word. The King James actually doesn't even translate it. It just kind of moves it over into English. And you would say, well, what are your reins? Well, you may not think about what your reins are because it's not a way that we talk about it today. But you may have heard of someone in renal failure, and that renal failure is talking about their kidneys. And so reins means kidneys, and it's attaching the filtering thought process, and this is what they did. At that time, we would think about it as being attached to our brain, but we would call it our mind. That's what we would call it. We call it our mind, but we would kind of associate our mind with our brain and maybe a little bit of our mind with our heart. But the idea here is this is the filtering thought process of who you are. And that possessed is this idea that God went out and out of everything that he could have pulled from, he purchased for you. And before he gave it to you, he was the one that owned it because he was the creator of it. And we have this kind of talk, and you'll hear about this with the markets and stuff, and they'll talk about intellectual property, and this country's ripping off this country's intellectual property. And that intellectual property is kind of what you've learned, what you've been able to apply, what you've been able to build, and what you know. And think about this. Before they were your thoughts, God reached out. He got for you and created for you. And because he was the creator of it, he owned it. So before you owned it, he owned it. And he gave it to you. So let's move on here. He says, so you've possessed my reins. You're the one that created. You're the one that made. You're the one that kind of out of every way that there is to think about things, you've reached up, you've kind of packaged to get it together, and you've put it in me. So you know me because you made me the way that I am. And I think the way that I think, and I process the way that I process, because this is how you've made me to think. So thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. So he's made you. He's knit you together. It says, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it well. Whenever you look at the beauty of creation, whenever you look at the amazingness of space, the amazingness of our universe or our galaxy, or you go and you have a moment like I had this morning on top of the mountain, and you kind of look out at the beauty of God's creation and how it all kind of just mixed together this morning to make this beautiful poster card picture. Understand that God is the author of that, but among his wonderful works is you. So my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So among God's wonderful, amazing works is how he made you and who he made you to be. So we cannot discount ourselves from God's creativity, God's wonderful works, God's imagination. He made you the way he wanted you to be. We're going to see that here in verse 16 of Psalm 139. It says, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. The King James reads like this, and it has another word here that doesn't make sense, so we need to stop and think about it. It says, thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. And so it's this idea of this unformed version of you. So you had a beginning point, and you were being made in the image of God, and God was making you. And God, when you were just a thought to God, he knew your unformed substance. He knew all of this about you, and he's putting you together. You're incomplete, but he's making you up. It says, and in thy book, all my members were written. So God is making out this recipe and this design plan for you. So in God's book, you were written down. I put a dash of this and a dash of that, and I did this and I did that for these reasons. It says this, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there were none of them. That word continuance there, it's a word that we know what it means, continuance, continuing on, all that kind of stuff. We know what that means, but it doesn't make sense there, especially if you look in other translations and you see that they always use a word there that would mean days. And so you look it up. Once again, the Strong's Concordance is a good resource for us. And we see that continuance comes from the word yom. And the word yom is always talking about a period of time. It's the word in Genesis chapter 1 that is designated for day. So he makes the light day. He makes the light yom, day. So it can mean day. It can mean a long period of days. It can mean just a period of time. But this word yom always means time. So why do they use continuance there? Well, if you look up the word continuance, in a King James Concordance, what you'll see is that it's really only used in 4 different verses in all of the King James Version, and that's really the only translation that uses it and uses it in this manner. Continuance is used to kind of show an overarching view. And so what this is saying is that thine eyes, your eyes, God, you saw me when I was incomplete. You saw me when you thought of me. You saw me when you were putting me together and I was not yet formed. And then you made me from this incomplete, unperfect idea kind of. You created me, and you created me for when you made me with all of the days, all of my days, from the beginning to the end of my days. All of my days were in consideration when you made me. So what that means is the mountaintop days, God created you for those days. And we like those days. But also the valley days, the days where the fog is so thick, everything is chaotic, and you can't see very far past where you're at. God made you. He formed you. He made your mind. He gave you gifts for those days too. So what I would say is the gifts that make you great on the champion days, on the mountaintop days, on the wonderful days, are also the gifts that make you great in the fog, in the dense fog that you can't see through. And these gifts that He's given you, these ways that you think, in the way that He designed you. And so we can all look, when everything's working right, we can look and say, okay, well, this is what God has made me for. This is what God has made me to do. But the truth is God has made you for the chaotic days and for the foggy days and for the dark days just as much as He has made you for the bright days and the beautiful days and the mountaintop days. God has made you for the valley just as much as He's made you for the mountain. And the reasons that God has made you and the things that He's put in you, that if you will follow Him, He will bring out in you and make you successful with on the mountaintop, is the same things that He's going to carry you through with, and the same gifts that He's given you to get you through the fog and through the ugly days. God has made you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that means that you are one of His wonderful works. That when you put certain things up on a pedestal, wow, the Grand Canyon, wow. The Smoky Mountains, wow. The beautiful fall leaves, wow. This morning on top of the mountain, wow. The Rocky Mountains, wow. Space, wow. You, wow. Who you are and how God has made you. He has designed you to go and be a person that reveals His glory, both in the fog and on the mountaintop. Hey, I'm glad you joined me today. Hope this is a great encouragement to you. I know it's coming out late, but the more and more I studied this, the more and more excited, the deeper and deeper I got. And finally I decided, okay, I got to stop here and go make a video. But I love this passage. I love it when the Bible reaches out, grabs you, says, hey, slow down and meditate on how wonderful I am and the gift I've given you in my word. I'm glad you tuned in. I hope this has been beneficial to you, and I cannot wait to see you Sunday morning.